Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mummy.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 244 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is your host, Jackson Mummy. I'm glad to be with you. Oh my gosh, it's April. Can you believe it? It seems like time is flying by. April is a significant month in the bar exam season because it represents the beginning of results from the February tests, as well as really the formal kickoff, at least in our mind, for the upcoming July exams. So if you took your bar exam in February of 2019, well, we're now in that season when results are starting to come out. In fact, by the time this episode is released, we may have already heard from a couple of smaller jurisdictions. So good luck to all of you waiting for your February 2019 results. We'll start to see Florida results in April. We'll also see some states near the end of the month, probably New York, Texas, some big states there. And the exam results season will continue through the month of May. But as I said, April's also a month when we really begin the kickoff to the July exam. In fact, as this episode is being released, we've just passed the 120-day mark leading up to the July 2019 exam. And if you are planning on taking that test and you're thinking that you've got a lot of time left to study, that's wrong, you don't. This is the time when you need to begin. In fact, this is the sweet spot. This first week in April is the best time in our view to start your studies for that upcoming July exam. Now, if you're planning on taking the exam in 2020, it's not too early to begin either, and so you should be underway. You just can take a more leisurely approach. So whatever your circumstances are, we're glad you're with us. We've got lots of information for you. We'll keep you informed as we get results in from various jurisdictions around the country. And for those of you that are going to be taking your exams, I want to let you know that we've got a special free training called Do Something Different. Make the next bar exam your last bar exam. It's coming up Thursday night, 7 p.m. local time, and it's free. All you have to do is go to the show notes here on the video page or on the audio page for the podcast, and you can register. And during this 90-minute presentation, I'm going to walk you through the 4 steps that successful bar exam students follow. I'll be using case studies, lots of examples. I'll show you step by step what you have to do in order to make the next exam your last bar exam. I hope you'll join us. It's a great opportunity. It's something that we've had thousands of people participate and attend in, and I think you'll really love it. But make sure you register. It's coming up this Thursday, 7 p.m. You can go directly to the registration page by going to celebrationbarreview.com/webinar. Now, I mentioned that you can be watching today's episode in video or audio form, and it's really simple to do that. If you'd like to watch today's video, you can go to celebrationbarreview.com/244. That's the episode number. And if you want to listen, you can find us on Apple iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, lots of places where podcasts are syndicated, so you've got lots of choices. Well, in today's episode, we're finishing up the third of a 3-part series about being uncomfortable. We started this by talking about a quotation that I love from Tony Robbins, the self-help guru. And Tony Robbins is notable for saying that you've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable if you want to grow, if you want to develop. And so back in episode 242, the first of the 3-part series, I talked about not getting comfortable, some things that you shouldn't be comfortable about when it comes to the bar exam. And I said you shouldn't be comfortable with failure. You shouldn't be comfortable with being a victim. You shouldn't be comfortable with making excuses. And you shouldn't be comfortable following others. And that got a lot of attention, got a lot of response from people. I think there was a lot of folks that were kind of stunned and shocked by some of that. And I heard from a lot of you, and I appreciated that. It was a good episode when I can evoke some response from folks. But then I went on in last week's episode in 243, and I talked about what should make you uncomfortable when it comes to the bar exam. And I said, you've got to get uncomfortable with your current life. You've got to get uncomfortable with your current study plan. You've got to be uncomfortable with what you currently know, and you've got to be uncomfortable with the way you currently demonstrate your competence. Well, if I thought I stirred up a hornet's nest with the first episode, the second one really blew people up, because when I started saying to them that they couldn't be comfortable with their study plan or couldn't be comfortable with what they knew or the way they demonstrated their competence, well, you would have thought that I had said that the earth was flat instead of round, or the other way around, I guess. The point is that I really poked some some sacred bubbles there. And that's good. I want to get you thinking. I want to challenge your assumptions. I want to challenge what you think you're supposed to be doing. This is particularly true if you're a bar repeater. If you've been doing the same old thing and getting the same old result, I think it's obvious that you need to reimagine or rethink about your assumptions about the study process. You got to get uncomfortable with some of that, and that's what we were attempting to do. Now, if you haven't listened to those two podcasts, I encourage you to do that. It's episode 242 and episode 243, and we'll link to them in the show notes, as well as just you can go right onto our website and find them there. But today, we're going to finish up our series by talking about what you should be comfortable with. What you should be comfortable with. And I think this might be in some ways perhaps a more uplifting message for some of you, I hope at least, because there are some things that I think you should be comfortable with as you begin your bar exam studies. And so let's go ahead and jump into that particular message for today. What should you be comfortable with? Well, I'm going to suggest that there are three broad categories where I think you should be comfortable. And they're not really contradictions to what I've said before, but they're illuminations or elaborations on them. The first thing I think you ultimately will have to get comfortable with is your identity. Now, this is very different than what I talked about before when I said you shouldn't be comfortable with failure, you shouldn't be comfortable with a lot of things around your life. However, identity is something quite different. I've been recently going through, I photo-read a book by James Clear. It's called Atomic Habits. It's a terrific book. I really encourage you to photo-read or read it if you're a regular reader. And the book is really this amazing breakdown of the way that we do things in life, what Clear calls atomic habits, small repeated activities that lead to bigger outcomes. And he identifies this process early on in his book as being a little bit like peeling back an onion. He says that one of the things that we do is that we have to have sort of a three-layered approach in our life. At the outermost layer, we've got our goals in life, the things that we want to accomplish. Now, for a bar taker, this is pretty obvious. Your goal is to pass the bar exam. I want to suggest, however, that your goal should be bigger than that. And I've said this elsewhere. If the only goal you've got is to pass the bar exam and you have no idea what happens after that, it is difficult to push yourself all the way through the tape if we're using the imagery of a runner trying to finish a race. You've got to run through the tape. There's got to be something on the other side of passing the bar exam that motivates you. I often ask people who are coming in to take the bar, what is it that motivates you? What is it that drives you? And if they say, well, I just need to pass the bar, I get that. But that's usually not enough to get them all the way to the finish line. I had a conversation with someone recently who said to me, I've got to pass the bar. And I probed a little bit. I said, well, but why? What is it you want to do? They had been away from the exam and the law for 6 or 7 years. And this individual said to me, well, I'm newly single. I've got a couple of small children. It's something that I really wanted to do before and couldn't do it. And I care very much about a particular field of law. And I said, okay, so what you really want to do is to practice law in this particular field and take care of your family and have a sense of accomplishment. And she said, yes, absolutely, all of those things. And I said, well, passing the bar is just a step along the way, isn't it? Oh, yeah, it is. It's not the end goal. It's just one of the things you have to do to get to the ultimate result that you want. I think you have to start with having well-defined goals. And the goals are more than just passing the bar. The goal is, what is it you want to do after you pass the bar? Now, you may not know the specific part of the law you want to practice. You may not even know if you want to practice law yet. But there's got to be something to which the bar is a component. We talked about in one of the previous episodes the importance of being willing to push yourself through the discomfort of study in order to get to your results. And if you don't have a big enough goal, it's very difficult to do that. And so you have to have a well-defined goal as to what this is going to be. Now, clearly, we are interested in you passing the bar. That's a very good goal. It's not the only one, it's not the end point, but it is one of our goals. Now, what James Clear says in Atomic Habits is, once you've identified the goal, the next step down, if we're peeling back our onion one more layer, is to look at the habits or the process that you use to reach that goal. That is, if I'm going to pass the bar, I'm going to need a process, a study process, an approach, a set of habits. Those habits might include things like studying a certain number of hours every day, or designating particular times of your life to this process of studying. It may include buying a bar review course so that you've got a process that teaches you. It might include adding photo reading or paraliminals or meditation or other tools to help you become more effective in your study. One of the things we recommend for our students is that they generate and create a habit of daily exercise. We find that it improves their study. So it might be, if you've not been someone who's been exercising, that you need to be exercising, or you need to be eating better. I got a wonderful note from a student who just finished their February 2019 exams. They don't know if they've passed yet or not, but they talked about the fact that they had lost 25 pounds of weight. They were eating healthy. They were getting out and exercising. And the student said, you know, I'm excited about the bar exam. I'm excited about the potentially good results, but I'm really more excited that I feel like I have my life back. I feel like I'm in control of my life, that I have a routine that I follow every day, even after the bar exam. I get up, I exercise for a while, I have a good, healthy breakfast, I move on to my day's work. They've created a habit or a process for what they're doing. Now, when we think about it in the context of the goals, we want our habits and our processes to lead us towards those goals, obviously. So if my goal is to pass the bar exam, I need a set of habits, a process that will get me there. Now, is that going to be, I won't study at all until 6 weeks before the exam and then I'll go crazy? That's not a very good habit or process. The better goal, the better habit, at least today as I'm talking, for our current students who are watching in real time, is to be studying about 20 hours a week. That means about 3 hours a day. If you could be doing that every day, then you're creating a habit, you're creating a process. If you're using meditation, meditate every day. If you're using paraliminal recordings, which are designed to help remove some of the blocks in your brain, use them every day. If you are eating, which I presume you are, eat well every day. Go to bed every night at the time that you would go to bed for the bar exam. Get up at the time you would get up on bar exam day. Create the habits and the processes. If you're going to be writing essays on your bar exam, and almost everyone will, then write essays when you're studying in the morning, if that's what it's given in your exam. Don't try and do your studies in the middle of the night if you can help it, because you're taking the bar exam from 9 a.m. until 3 or 4 p.m. During the day. In other words, create the habits and the processes that are consistent with the goal of passing the bar exam. When you do that, you will see that as you start to create those daily study habits, you have better success and you have more continuity and you're moving yourself towards your goals. Now, there are lots of different habits and lots of different processes. And in our course, we do a variety of things, not just exercise and eating right, but we also have a series of affirmations, a series of things that we want you to read and see and look at every single day. In fact, in the last 30 days before the bar exam, I send out a series of daily email messages just to get people in the habit and the process of thinking about what that day's study is going to be like. So the idea of habits and processes is deeply ingrained in our methodology and in our approach to the study. But here's what Clear says in his book that just really struck me hard, because when he peels down to the third level, and he goes beyond goals and habits, he gets into the innermost level and he says, but really none of this is going to work if your identity is not congruent with those habits and those goals. Now, here's what he means by that, I think. If your identity, if your self-view, if who you see yourself as being at your inner core is not consistent with your goals and your habits, it's never going to happen. So for example, your goal is to pass the bar and you've got a series of processes. You bought a bar review course and there's a series of habits and processes that are built in. If your identity, however, is I'm not a good student, I'm not a good writer, I'm not a good test taker, I'm not a smart person, what do you think the odds are that you're going to follow those processes and lead towards your goal? Well, in my experience, over 30 years of teaching the bar, I found that when the disconnect happens at that level, it is very difficult to overcome. That if someone ultimately believes that they are not a good student, that they're not a good test taker, that they are not going to be a good and competent lawyer, almost no habit, no process, no system or methodology can overcome that resistance. You see, if we really believe that we're not talented and capable enough, we will fight and sabotage ourselves when it comes to the habits and processes we need to reach our goal. And the reason that we do this, at least as I've read about it, is that the ego and the id are really designed to protect us from psychoses. If we've told ourselves we're not a good student, then our non-conscious brain says, well, then we must not be a good student, because to do otherwise would mean that you're crazy. And we're not going to allow that to happen. Even if the results of being not a good student would not be in our favor, we're simply not going to do that. One of the reasons that I love meditation so much is that I think it helps provide clarity. It helps provide awareness or mindfulness about this idea. People don't deliberately hurt themselves, but we get into these ruts in our thinking that can be incredibly self-destructive. Oh, I'm no good at, followed by ... I call in the webinar, I call this the Billy Bob syndrome, because you're hypnotized, like this guy I met, Billy Bob, who was hypnotized and couldn't say his name by the hypnotist. Now, how silly is that? The guy can't remember his own name, but we allow ourselves to be hypnotized by the words that we tell ourselves, by the identity that we give ourselves. Now, let me flip the script for just a minute, because this is important. Let's say that your identity is that you think of yourself as a good student, a potentially great lawyer. You think of yourself as someone who's a successful test taker and a competent and intelligent person. With that identity, then when you're given the process of studying by reading and listening to lectures and taking practice questions and doing that work over a period of time, that feels pretty normal and natural. Isn't that what a good student would be doing? Of course it is. And when you then follow those processes, the result of that is that you pass the bar. It all makes sense, doesn't it? Let's put it in another context. Let's say that we're talking about athletics and going to the gym. If your identity is that you're athletic, then it's really not difficult to get up and go to the gym and work out and build the kind of body and muscle tone and skill that you need to be a successful athlete. But if your identity is, I'm not a good athlete, then it really doesn't matter how often you schedule those trips to the gym or how many meetings you've got with a personal trainer. You're just never going to connect. And I've been there. I've been that guy that had 3 sessions a week with a personal trainer. But my own personal identity was that I wasn't an athlete. And therefore, I was constantly procrastinating. I was constantly avoiding. I hated every moment of it. It just didn't work for me. And I didn't really achieve much in the way of a goal. It wasn't until I got my own set of goals that I identified myself and I get my identity that said, you know what, may not be an athlete, but I love to walk. And I love to drink coffee. So I put those two things together and I walk to get my coffee. And there I get 15,000 steps a day. It was very easy to do that. The process fell right in once I had the identity in place. So one of the things I think you have to get comfortable with then is your identity. What is your identity when it comes to the bar exam, to study in general, to academics? I'm really surprised when I talk to people who say, and they're getting ready to take the bar, and they say, I'm not a good student and I'm not a good test taker. I really wonder how they reached that conclusion, because in order to get to the point of taking the bar exam, think about what you had to do. You had to get through high school and take a test to get into college. Then you had to do well enough in college and take a bunch of tests, and then you had to take a test to get into law school, and you had to do well enough on that test to get into school. And then you were in law school and you had to take a bunch of tests and get through all of those to graduate from law school. You've been good at tests all your life. So why is it that you suddenly decided you weren't good at tests? Maybe it's because you failed the bar exam, maybe more than once. But that 1 or 2 or number of times you've taken the bar can't possibly outweigh a lifetime of doing well on tests. And yet I hear this all the time from people. In spite of the empirical evidence that they're really pretty good test takers and pretty good students, they come to the bar so completely beaten down that they say, I'm not good at this. And their identity disconnects from the process and the goals. So one of the things we have to do is rebuild the identity. We have to get someone comfortable with their identity as a student, as an academic, as a lawyer. You know, if you're already in the practice of law, it's a lot easier to see what that day-to-day world looks like. And I think existing lawyers who are taking a new bar have a great advantage over law students in this regard. You already know what it means to be a lawyer. You know you're capable of doing it. And sometimes all we have to do is remind you of that. Hey, look, you're running a practice, or you're in practice, or you've been practicing, or you did practice for some number of years. You know how to do this. You're capable of doing this. And we've got to put that identity back into place. Sometimes we forget our identities. We lose sight of who we are. Maybe we've been taking care of kids at home for many years, or we've been out of the workforce, or we've been doing something completely unrelated to law. But it doesn't mean you don't have the capacity and the capability. In fact, I would say if you didn't have those things, you wouldn't have the itch or the dream or the desire to pass the bar. I don't think most people wake up one morning and say, you know what, I think I want to take a bar exam. No, I don't think it happens that way at all. I think something's put there inside you and you've got to satisfy that urge. And that's part of it. And the urge isn't so much to pass the bar exam, it's to do something after you pass the bar. So if you're having trouble staying consistent with your habits, with the process, with the technique, I would suggest that you look not to your goals, but to your identity. Look to ask yourself, what is it about the way I view myself that might be in a disconnect with the work that I'm doing? And then start to identify those identity questions. And again, this is where tools like paraliminals and meditation are incredibly helpful because they allow you to get really clear about what the identity is that you're using and then to change and modify that identity. And I've seen lots of people change their identity, change their core belief about who they are and what they can do. You know, a lot of times it comes with weight loss or exercise or just a general change in life. I've had a lot of people who've gotten such a different view on their identity that they quit their old jobs or they changed their lives or they had the conversation they've been dreading having with their adult children and they told them really what they thought. I mean, whatever it was, you can do that by changing your identity. And it's not just a simple snap of the fingers. It takes some work, but it can be done. And once your identity is in line and you're comfortable with that identity, then it is possible to reach the goals you've got. So, long time talking about that, but I really wanted to make that point and really encourage you to check out the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. It is an absolutely fascinating look at this in much more depth. Well, the second thing that I think you have to get comfortable with is you got to be comfortable with being a risk taker. Now, I've just been talking about this idea of finding and setting your identity and then going in and following it through and reaching your goals. And that sounds all very straightforward, doesn't it? And very non-risk process. But in truth, it is a big risk to take a high stakes test like the bar exam. Look, it's a test that says you get to go on in your career or you got to stop. So there's a lot at stake there. It's not just, well, I could still practice law, but not as well. Or I could kind of do this, but I don't get as much money. No, it's all or nothing. It's the whole enchilada. And the result of that is that it becomes a very high stakes test. Now, when you took the SAT or the LSAT, well, that was a big test, but if you didn't get the best score, your score was good enough to get you into wherever you got into. So it wasn't like it's all or nothing. But the bar, oh my gosh, it's all or nothing. It is a big, big risk. It's also a big risk because if you fail, it becomes very easy to see the test and the result as being a personal referendum. And this goes back to identity. I talked to way too many bar takers who failed the bar exam, who have then conflated that result with a personal statement. So what they say to me is, I'm a failure. Not that I failed the test, but I'm a failure. I've let other people in my family down. I've left my law school down. I've let my friends down. I've left my employer down. And really what they're saying is they've let themselves down. And you know, sometimes that's true. I think if you don't make the effort, that certainly would be true. But I know people that have put everything they've got into it and they still don't pass the test. And that doesn't mean that they're a failure. In fact, I've seen some people fail the bar exam who I think were incredible successes and looked at that and said, you know what, this just isn't for me and I can go off and do other things, and they've had great successes in other parts of their lives. I've also seen people who've had to work at it over a long period of time. We did an interview with a guy, Glenn Winter, who had taken the California bar over 25 times. By any definition, I think most people have said, well, that guy is a failure. But he never saw it as a failure. He saw himself improving. He saw himself growing. He never thought that he was the failure. And you know what? He passed the test and he's having a ball. He's having a great time practicing law. Why? Because in his mind, that was always going to happen. It just took a long time. He was willing to take the risk. And of course, it's a huge risk when you've taken the bar that many times, I guess, in terms of just your ego. But he was willing to take that risk because the reward was worth it to him. And that really gets at what I think being a risk taker means in this case. You have to look at the reward versus the risk. You know, we're all economic beings in the sense that we will not do things that we think have high risk and very low reward. That is to say, and the great example for me is if there was a board, a beam, and it was 6 inches in width, and it was placed on the floor, and I was asked to walk across that beam without falling off. Well, there's not much risk in walking across that beam. I'd say, okay, maybe I'd do it. And if the reward was, we'll give you $10 if you can make it across, Okay, I'd take that. It's right on the floor. I can walk across for 10 bucks. Well, now for the same 10 bucks, we're going to raise the beam up 6 inches off the ground. And I'm not so sure I want to do that at 6 inches, but okay, maybe I'd be willing. 6 inches isn't that far to fall. But now what if we take that same beam and we put it up 10 feet above the ground? Well, now I am not going to walk across that beam 10 feet over the ground for 10 bucks. Would I do it for 1,000? No, I wouldn't. Would I do it for $10,000? No, I still probably wouldn't do it. I hate heights. Would I do it for $1 million? No, because money wouldn't motivate me. But what if that beam 10 feet across was the only way to get from one building that was not on fire to a building across the way that was on fire where I needed to rescue my family? Oh, now I would walk across that beam. I would crawl across that beam. Suddenly my reward is much greater than the potential risk. And this is an interesting phenomenon of human behavior. As we raise the reward, then we evaluate the risk differently. Same board, same 6 inches. The only difference now is what's the reward that's out there. I think that the reality for a lot of bar takers is that when they consider what the reward is of passing the bar, it's oftentimes not enough to mitigate the risk of taking and failing it, the ego risk, the humiliation of failing, the money that you have to pay. A great example of this is in Florida. The Florida bar examiners have made their bar exam one of the most expensive exams in the country to take. It's thousands of dollars if you've been in practice for many years just to sit for the exam. Plus, there's a very, very extensive character and background check. In fact, it can take 8 months to a year just to do the background check in Florida. And they'll ask you every place you've lived since you were 16 years old and every job you've had and every lawsuit you've ever been involved in. That's a lot, particularly if you're 40, 50, 60 years old. And you got to take every part of the exam. You can't wave into anything. Now, you might say, why do the examiners do that? Well, it's risk and reward. You see, the examiners know that it's nice to live in Florida, it's sunny, and if you're up in New York and it's snowing and miserable, you might be saying to yourself, you know what, I ought to follow my clients down to Florida and become a member of the Florida bar. That would be nice. All right, now the question is it worth all the money, all the time, all the effort, and taking the bar exam? And for a lot of attorneys from other states, the answer is no, of course not, absolutely not. So what the examiners have done is they've said, well, we're going to raise the risk high enough that you've got to really want the reward. You got to really want to be here. There's got to be a real reason for you to come to this jurisdiction. And Florida is not the only state that's done that, but I think it's one of the most glaring or jarring examples of where it's just not even, they don't even pretend that it's something different. They just flat out don't want you here. We call it the Yankee go home syndrome. And so what happens is that the risk reward ratio has to be evaluated. And so if you're not comfortable with the risk, then you're not going to go forward. But how do you get comfortable with the risk? Well, you weigh it in comparison to the reward. If you have big dreams, if there are things that you want to do, things that you are passionate about doing beyond the bar exam, in other words, once you've got your bar membership, what is it you want to do? If that's so big, so compelling to you, so driving in your life, then you're willing to take the big risk. Now, I want to flip that for just a moment because I think that one's pretty obvious. If there's something I absolutely want to do, I want to come to this particular jurisdiction, I want to practice law because I want to do work that really is meaningful to me. That's terrific. But there are a lot of law students today that take the bar exam and you talk to them and they go, I don't know. I mean, I just, I got to take the bar. It's what I got to do. It's, I went to law school. I got to take the bar. What do you want to do after you pass the bar? I don't know. I haven't seen anything that really inspires me. Nothing that's interesting to me. Are there big rewards for those people? No, but there's not much risk either. And here's what I mean by it. They just finished school. They're 24, 25 years old. They take the bar exam. Maybe they pass, maybe they don't. Doesn't really matter. One way or the other, they're going to have to still go get a job. Maybe they're still living in mom's basement. It really doesn't have much risk to them to take the exam, but there's not much reward either. Now, if I raise the risk, if I said, well, you got to take the exam, but you only get one try or you're done and you'll never be able to take the bar exam, well, now you'd start to see some people sweat. Things would be different, wouldn't they? So I think that you have to look at this process and ask yourself, what are the dreams? What are the goals? And are they big enough to move you forward to take the risk? If your risk-reward ratio is out of balance, it's going to be very difficult for you to be successful on the exam. You've got to be willing to literally put your head down and give up the time with friends, the effort, the money, the experience. You've got to humiliate yourself in some ways intellectually, because there are things you just don't know. And very few of us are used to saying we don't know things, particularly if we've come from the background in the law. You've got to be willing to humble yourself in order to pass. And the question is, what's the risk that comes with that? Is there a reward that's going to be worth that risk? Along with that is the possibility of failure. When we talk about being a risk taker, now I said in one of the earlier lectures that we did that you have to get to this stage of not being comfortable with failure, that you had to be determined to succeed. If you're comfortable with failure, you're not going to be successful. But I do think you have to be comfortable with the possibility of failure. And what I mean by this is that if you're going to take a risk, there is a possibility that you'll fail. You know, great entrepreneurs fail a lot typically before they succeed. And you've heard all of the rags to riches stories, the people that failed a bunch of times before they succeeded. I'm not going to bore you with them. But I think it's important to recognize that unless you're willing to accept the possibility of failure, then you never take the chance. You never move forward. You never move into something else. I think the part of this that comes most home to me is when I talk to people who've been taking the bar exam, and they've taken it repeatedly and unsuccessfully, and they've used the big box bar review or some derivative of that. And they've done things the same way. They've issue spotted, they've memorized the law, they've recited rules, they've done all those things over and over without success. And I say to them, I think I can help you pass the bar exam, but we will do things differently. We won't memorize the law. What? We won't do flashcards. Oh no. We won't issue spot. We won't, you know, and on, right? And then when I'm done, they say, well, how could I do that? And I say, well, how's it been working for you so far? Well, it hasn't. But the risk of doing something different. What do you mean the risk of doing something different? Everything you've done hasn't worked. So you've got to do something different. You have to be willing to take the possibility of failure in order to have the opportunity to succeed. Now, does everyone that come to me succeed? No, they don't, obviously. But the people that come to me, I think, are the people that generally recognize that the possibility of failure is not a barrier to trying something else. And when they start to have success, and believe it or not, most of them do, when they start to see that success and the confidence that it brings, they often say to me, you know, I can't believe I waited so long to do this. I heard about you years ago. I heard about the things you were doing. I heard about PhotoReading and Paraliminals. I heard about your approach to test taking and writing, but I was afraid to do something different, even though what I was doing wasn't working. And if I asked them why they were afraid, they would say, well, I might have failed. And then they stop and say, oh, wait, I did fail. I kept failing. It wasn't until I was willing to put that aside and take the chance to take the risk of having a better reward. And so I think you have to be comfortable with being a risk taker. If you're not a risk taker, I think that you're not likely to pass the bar exam. If you're playing it safe, if you're just doing what everybody else is doing, as we've talked about in the last couple of episodes, the chances are, the odds are, you won't pass. That's what the statistics tell us. And so playing it safe, just following the crowd, being one of the people that just kind of marches along, you know, issue spotting, memorizing, and reciting, it may seem like the safe thing to do, but it's actually the most risky thing you can do because it's not very successful. And it's a very hard lesson for people to learn. All right. The third and last of the things that I think you have to get comfortable with is being uncomfortable. It's really the summation of these three episodes that we've been doing. You know, you have to get comfortable with the idea that you're going to be uncomfortable for at least a little while. And that little while is important. This is not a forever thing. You don't have to be uncomfortable forever to pass the bar exam. You have to be uncomfortable for a few months or maybe a year or two. You've got to be willing to be uncomfortable until you reach your goal. And then you're going to set a new goal. And I hate to tell you, you'll probably be uncomfortable in order to get to that one, and then be uncomfortable, and then be uncomfortable. But each of those is different and unique in its own way. And until you're comfortable with the idea of being uncomfortable, it's very hard to move out of any of that. You know, when we sit in our comfort zone, well, it feels nice and safe and warm, but really we're not moving, we're not growing, we're not developing. There's no excitement in our lives. There's no development in our lives. We're just static. You've been around somebody who's static? It's not a lot of fun, not generally the people that we want to hang out with. And so when you recognize that you are going to be uncomfortable, also remember that it is for a season, that being uncomfortable about the bar exam is for a season. I know it's not easy to do this work. I know it's not easy to incorporate and learn all of this material. It's not easy to learn a different way to write. It's not easy to learn a different way to study and to demonstrate your competence. Those things will make you uncomfortable. But if you approach the process as, I'm going to be comfortable with the fact that I'm uncomfortable for a while, it makes it so much easier and manageable. I think you also, in being comfortable with the idea of being uncomfortable, you have to recognize that there's going to be some sacrifice involved. I don't know many major goals in life that come sacrifice-free. You had to make sacrifices, many of you, to get to law school. I know I certainly did. I had to relocate my family with 2 young children. My wife had to give up her job and support us for 3 years while I went to law school. I had to work multiple jobs while I was going to law school. I did not have an easy way through, an easy path. I'm not embarrassed to tell you that I cleaned bathrooms as a janitor in order to help pay for the schooling that I did. I had to be willing to make a sacrifice. Why? Well, I guess in my case, I thought that there was something better for me. I thought that I could be a great lawyer. As it turned out, it wasn't really so much being a great lawyer. I don't think I was. It was being what I hope is a pretty great teacher. And as I began to see that possibility and that opportunity in my life, as that became clearer to me, I realized that the sacrifices I was making, that I was asking my family to make, could be well worth it. And it turned out 30 years later that they were. But you have to be willing, I think, to make some sacrifices in your life. You have to be willing to sacrifice, certainly while you study for the bar. You're going to miss some events, some birthdays, some holidays. You're going to miss some vacations. You're going to miss out on some of the things that you would have done otherwise. You're going to spend some money that on your bar review and on your studies and maybe on your laptop for the computer for the bar exam that you could have used elsewhere. There are going to be sacrifices in your life. And because of that, it's going to feel uncomfortable. And you've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable about those sacrifices because they're part of the process. It's part of what you will have to do. But if the dream is big enough, if the goal is big enough, if the reward is big enough, then those sacrifices all are worthwhile. And I don't know many people on the day that they get sworn into the bar who say, you know what, this was not worth it. No, not that at all. Look at the pictures that we put up in the interviews that we've done with people. And we asked them what it was like that moment that they found out that they passed the bar. And they will tell you whether they're a first-time taker or they've taken the exam 25 or 30 times before they passed. It was worth it. It was worth it. Everything I had to go through, it was worth it to get to this moment. And that's what you need to be willing to do. You need to be willing to make that sacrifice. I think you have to be willing to get comfortable with being uncomfortable about the idea that growth is going to happen for you. You know, if you really believe that you don't have to learn anything or develop any new skills or create any new abilities, and you're going to be able to pass this exam, you're delusional. It won't happen. There are very few people who come straight out of law school or straight out of the womb who are able to pass a bar exam. They're a handful, but they're literally a handful, and I guarantee none of them are listening to this podcast. So if you're listening or watching this podcast, I think it is inevitable that you will have to grow if you're going to pass the bar. Now, some of you will have to grow a lot. You've got a lot of skills to learn. Some of you will only have to grow a little, and that's okay. It's not a competition. It's not this person grew more, they're better. But all of us have to grow in the process, and yet growth is what makes life so amazing, isn't it? You watch your children grow, you know they have to grow. You know that some of it's going to be painful and hard, but you also know that it is an inevitability of growing up, of learning, of becoming, going from a baby, an infant, a toddler, a young child, to a teenager and an adult. That growth is really part of the journey, and the journey is so amazing. You know, in this last week, we had some amazing moments of growth in our family. We have a 5-month-old grandson who's just learning to roll over and get up on his knees, and that growth is so exciting. And then we've got a 22-year-old grandson who just enlisted in paralegal training in the U.S. Army. Wow, suddenly from a college graduate to a military man. What kind of growth? And then we have a niece that got married. And you see the growth in people's lives and you say, wow, how amazing is that? They're all taking risks. They're all growing. They're all developing. That's what the process is about. When you can get comfortable with being uncomfortable, it's because you know that there's growth at the end. You know that there's growth along the way. You know that there's some reason to be engaged in this journey. If you're not growing, you're not learning, you're not expanding your world, you're not moving forward. Ultimately, the reason I love teaching the bar, I think, so much is because it is a measurable way of seeing growth in people's lives. It is a turning point in their career. It's the switch from being a student in law school, typically, into the practice of law, or from being out of the law and back into it, or changing where one is practicing. It's a gateway, and it's a gateway that measures growth. And it's so amazing to be on that journey with people, to be part of their growth, to be part of their stories. It's why I love telling their stories. And as we get results in from the upcoming February exams, I look forward to sharing the stories of more students with you, because the growth, the story that they tell, the way that they bring that story together is so totally amazing. Well, that's our 3-part series. We've talked about this idea of being comfortable, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I hope that it's stimulated you to give some thought to the way that you're developing and growing, the way that you're seeing your identity and processing that, the way that you are taking on new risks and new challenges, and ultimately recognizing that for a season, for a time, you're going to have to be a bit uncomfortable. In the end, I think it's well worth it. And every single person that I've talked to who's passed the bar, at the moment that they pass, would tell you just that. It was worth being uncomfortable. Well, thanks for being with us through this 3-part series. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have too. I'd love to get your comments and thoughts as always. You can always drop us a note, jackson@celebrationbarreview.com, or leave us an honest rating and review on Apple iTunes. We love those as well. Before we sign off for today, just want to remind you, we've got our free training coming up. It's called Do Something Different. Make the next bar exam your last bar exam. It's this Thursday, 7 p.m. local time. All you have to do is click on the button on the video podcast or the audio podcast, or by going to celebrationbarreview.com/webinar. And we'll see you on the training. And we'll join you along this uncomfortable road to something that's well worth it, and that is to pass the bar. Thanks, everybody. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.